Hey Preds Nation, Johnny here again, leading up to the 2023 NHL entry draft that again, the Preds will be hosting, the second draft in their franchise history. I wanted to continue to look back at the history of Preds drafts in different categories. For this video, I wanted to look back in Preds history at the best player the Preds took in every round that has ever existed for drafts that they participated. Not players they could have had. That was yesterday. No, we're going to look back at each individual round and I will tell you who the best player the Preds got and what year, of course, that it happened in. You all may disagree with my selections for each round. I totally expect a lot of you to even disagree with my first round selection, but feel free to leave your feelings in the comments and we could always discuss it further there. Okay, so the first round. Like I said, this is probably going to spark some discussion, seeing as who the Preds have had lead them to different moments in franchise history. But considering longevity, considering he was there from the start and saw this team through a lot, even though he was never named captain, the best first round selection, in my opinion, in franchise history is David Legwand. Preds Nation, I know David Legwand was never the game changer we all hoped he would be when the Preds made him their first pick in franchise history, second overall back in 1998. But he did play his first 15 seasons with the Preds and would hold the franchise record for goals until eventually Philip Forsberg broke it. Remember, the man helped lead this franchise to its first ever second round appearance in the playoffs. My choice of David Legwand as the best first pick in franchise history could very well be surpassed eventually by Philip Tomasino or Yaroslav Askarov, but for now, number 11 stays put. Heck, even Joakim Kamel could be in this spot eventually down the road, considering how well he performed for the Milwaukee Admirals in this spring's playoffs in the AHL. And no, we're not going to talk about Eeli Tolvanen. That's a choice for another list down the road. Second round. Now, I know this will probably be heavily debated amongst longtime fans of the fan base who love both of these men, who both served as captain with Mike Fisher for one season as the meat in between these two pieces of bread. And considering the fact that I used with the criteria with David Legwand in the first round, if Shea Weber never gets traded, he's probably far and away my choice for a second round. But that all said and done, by the time his career is over, he will probably lead the franchise in history with assists, most likely points. My selection for the best second round pick in franchise history by the Preds has got to be Roman Josi. After failing to make it past the second round for 6 seasons as Preds captain, general manager David Poile thought it was time for a change to give the team a new identity, and the team transitioned eventually after Mike Fisher was captain to Roman Josi taking over leadership of this team. And even though since he's been captain they haven't reached past the second round, it's clear that this team runs through the blue line when Roman Josi sets breakout plays after the Preds have played in a defensive zone. Hopefully, for all his hard work being with this team since the late 2000s in that decade, hopefully Roman Josi will be rewarded and will be here to lift the first Stanley Cup in franchise history above his head. The third round. Well, if there's one round in franchise history, the Preds have had little to no success in long-lasting players being on this team's roster, it would be the third round. And you know, that's kind of surprising considering it's still relatively early in the draft. Nobody on this team right now was drafted in the third round by the Preds, and historically for the franchise, there's not really a fan favorite either. Preds Nation, names that you might recognize that were drafted by the Preds in franchise history that played at one time for this team include Michael Latta, who was packaged with Martin Erat to acquire Philip Forsberg from the Washington Capitals. Cody Franzen was drafted in the 3rd round. Brendan Leipzig. Oh yes, and of course, Rat Boy Jimmy Vesey. But if I have to put my finger and choose one person as the best 3rd round pick in franchise history, let's go all the way back to the first draft in franchise history in Buffalo, New York in 1998, taken in the 3rd round, 60th overall, Denis Arkhipov. Hailing from Kazan, Russia, Arkhipov would go on to play 4 seasons for the Preds, including being the youngest player in franchise history to score 20 goals, and he would eventually be a part of the Preds team that would make the playoffs for the first time in franchise history in their 6th season. Compared to the 3rd round, the 4th round was a lot harder to pinpoint the best player in franchise history. So to be fair, I ran a Twitter poll to gauge Preds Nation on who they thought was the best. The 4 selections that I offered up, none of them has played their entire career and retired as a Pred, so I thought it was fair to choose these 4 for everyone to vote on. But with a resounding victory, you had UC Saros with 76% of the vote, Matthias Ekholm with 10% of the vote, Victor Arvidsson with 8%, and Craig Smith with 5%. Personally, my pick would have been Craig Smith because he was always a consistent 20-goal scorer, and throughout his time with the Preds, I always thought he spoke for the fan base, especially with how pissed off he was speaking for the fan base after they choked in the 2018-2019 playoffs against the Dallas Stars. All 4 are very noteworthy, and I totally respect putting it out there and for Preds Nation to select UC Saros as the best 4th round selection in franchise history. But considering the fact, if not for the chicken soup game back in the 2016-2017 season that required the emergency start of UC Saros being called up from Milwaukee to start against Pittsburgh at home inside Bridgestone Arena, I wonder what might have been for this franchise moving forward. In the 5th round, again, this is where there starts to be a little bit of a drop-off. There was Matt Hendricks, but he found more success elsewhere. There was notable Cal O'Reilly. But I think the best player taken in franchise history in the 5th round was 132nd overall in 2009, Gabriel Bourque. Gabriel Bourque would go on to score 31 goals in franchise history in the regular season, and I think the highlight for him as a member of this team was helping finally defeat Big Brother, the Detroit Red Wings, in the 1st round of the 2012 NHL playoffs. The 6th round. So yeah, this was totally a fun round to go through, kind of like the 4th round was, but for completely different reasons. There's Mike Santorelli, who scored 3 goals in franchise history. There's Marek Mazarnik, who recorded 8 wins during the 2013-2014 season. Never recorded another win in franchise history in the regular season. Found most of his success with the Milwaukee Admirals. So basically that leads me to a man I kind of alluded to in the Preds draft misses, because he did have a little bit of success. Go back to 2010, 168th overall in the 6th round, Anthony Bitetto. I told you it wasn't easy. It would take him 4 years to make the team. But I guess the reason why I'm naming him the best 6th round selection, considering the lack of choice here, is the fact that he would be the reason, basically, you got to admit it, the reason why the Preds were able to make the Stanley Cup final, because he held his own on a 3rd defensive pair. I'm not saying he was the 5th defensive man on this team. Of course he wasn't. But you need a good 3rd pair defenseman to help you get through 4 rounds of the playoffs. And, well, he held his own, didn't he? The 7th round. Here we are, 7 rounds in. And I wouldn't blame you if you said, Johnny, who could the Preds have possibly drafted in the 7th round that was memorable for a list like this? Well, Preds Nation, there are 2 choices. One of them was Mr. Irrelevant of his draft class, meaning that he was drafted with the last possible pick. He would eventually make the Preds, play pretty well, traded away for a winger that would help the Preds score more goals, only to come back in the Stanley Cup final against the Preds and stab him in the heart with 95 seconds left to go on Bridgestone Arena ice, so I will not mention his name. Clearly, there was only one right choice. He was drafted 191st overall back in 1999, Martin Erat. 2 seasons after being drafted, he would go on to play 10 seasons for the Preds, score over 150 goals and nearly 400 points. Now, I know he didn't play his entire career for the Preds, as I have used as a rule for previous players in different rounds prior to the 7th round. But considering the fact, longtime Preds fans probably understand why I put him on this list, because he was a trade asset that would eventually be exchanged to George McPhee of the Washington Capitals for Philip Forsberg. Period. End of story. Martin Erat is the best 7th round selection in Preds franchise history. I don't want to hear any arguments on the other guy who shall not be named. Without Phil Forsberg being acquired by general manager David Poile, Phil Forsberg is probably running up the goal totals in Washington, and George McPhee is still general manager there. We've arrived at the 8th round, the first of 2 rounds that are no longer used by the National Hockey League after the 2004 entry draft. Does this really need to be a discussion? I would hope young and old Preds fans watching this know who I'm talking about. He played goal for the Preds. He created a long-lasting charity with Shea Weber. He wore 35 for the Preds that's now hanging above Bridgestone Arena ice. He has a statue outside. Next! Finally, we've arrived at the 9th round. Among 8 players taken by the Preds in franchise history in the 9th round, you might think I might be grasping at straws, trying to pull one out of my butt, a name that at best probably found success only with the Milwaukee Admirals. But there is one, lest he be forgotten because he is no longer with us. Carlos Scranton's taken in the 9th round in the Preds' first ever draft back in Buffalo, 230th overall. Impressively, for a 9th round selection, he did crack the Preds lineup and play 2 games with them their rookie season, his rookie season as well. He would go on to play with the Preds their first 5 seasons as a team, and though he wouldn't be a part of the team that would finally make the playoffs in their 6th season, that 2003-2004 season, his impact was felt leading up to that point in franchise history. Just to prove how hard it was in Scranton's draft class to make it into the NHL and have a long-lasting impact, Toby Peterson is the only other player taken that late to play that much in the NHL, and Peterson played 400 games. Do you know how many games in his NHL career Scranton's played? 832! Maybe Carlos could have added a few more NHL games to that total, but we will never know, because unfortunately he was one of 45 souls lost when a KHL team lost their entire roster back in 2011 with the plane crash of Lokomotiv Yaroslav. Rest in peace, Carlos. Aside from that sad reminder with the 9th round, that was a nice walk down memory lane, looking at the best Preds draft pick in each round that has ever existed for the NHL draft. I hope you enjoyed this revisit as much as I did looking up and talking to you about it. So that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. As always, click a like if you like this video. Click subscribe if you really like it. You can find my social media by clicking on the channel name. Tell all your friends about Redemption. Get hype, Preds Nation. The Preds are hosting the 2023 NHL entry draft, and they have 13 picks to make on the floor of Bridgestone Arena.